It's already very polarized racially in its voting. Whites overwhelmingly go for the Republican candidate. Blacks overwhelmingly go for the Democratic candidate. The good news for Democrats here, it's not only the black share of the vote hasn't gone down, it's this. 10% of the electorate in Georgia tonight is either Latino or Asian, or they identify as other. All of these groups are voting overwhelmingly for the Democrats.
No candidate's going to get 2/3 of the white people.
And why would you want for? And it's not normal white political activists. It's white nationalists. It's people who are literally trying to create a white homeland. I mean, it's really the ragged edge of beyond the cliff right-wing politics. And their theory is if you can actually try to basically inspire enough white pride among white people who feel otherwise dislocated from politics, if you do a white nationalist approach to politics, that's why you get all this creepy Nazi stuff that's come up around the edges of the Trump campaign. We are going to get so many more white people who otherwise wouldn't vote because we're going to appeal to them in a way that nobody's ever appealed to them before.
And I don't believe that your premise that the Trump campaign was designed to create some kind of white nationalist.
I didn't say
How
that.
often... I know, but
my colleague did.
It really is about demographic composition, just how divided we are. So take a look in Ohio. The black vote here is critical for Democrats in Ohio. Remember, President Obama carried Ohio 4 years ago narrowly. That was pretty much the state that reelected him as president. So one of the keys to that 4 years ago was that 15% of the electorate in Ohio was black, and that represented enormous turnout among African Americans. If you think back pre-Obama, when John Kerry was the Democratic nominee back in 2004, that number was only 10%. So that reflects extremely high turnout. And again, that is one of the critical questions here. Barack Obama not on the ballot anymore. Will black voters turn out in numbers like that? Again, Democrats are going to need that to have a shot in Ohio.
So one of the first things you realize with the MSNBC coverage that if you increase your white vote, that's racist. But if you increase your black vote, then you're increasing diversity.
This is a state with one of the largest black populations, voting populations, and you see it was 23%. Black voters were 23% in North Carolina in 2012. This is a state that President Obama nearly won. It was his biggest near miss on the map.
Democrats absolutely need African-American voters to hang on in the same way with their candidate this year that they did with Barack Obama in 2008 and 2012. How do you see it? What do you think those prospects are?
Well, what I've been getting from people around the country in African-American communities, particularly in Ohio and Florida and North Carolina, is that in the last several days of early voting and today, there's been a big turnout of black voters. I think the African-American vote has really been energized by, A, the president and Mrs. Obama, and him President Obama tying it to his legacy and the continuation of his policies.
Which is fine. A community can support somebody's policies, but why is that okay for one race and not another? Why isn't it just a characteristic that some white people might like Republican policies without it being racist?
West Virginia, on the other hand, gets added to the Trump pile.
Again, we're talking about these divides all night. White voters with a college degree. What do you see? You see Trump by 13 points. The other big group of white voters, non-college white voters, blue-collar white voters. What you see here, well, look at this. On the surface, you'd say, wow, incredible news for Donald Trump, a 40-point lead. Keep this in mind, though. North Carolina is one of these states where this white college, white non-college divide had already arrived, because 4 years ago, when Mitt Romney ran, he won this same group by 49 points. So this 40-point deficit that Clinton's facing among non-college whites in North Carolina, in another state, we'd say that's a disaster for her. In North Carolina, this is actually progress for Democrats. What we're seeing tonight is they have done better. According to these exit polls, they have done better with white voters in North Carolina than Barack Obama did 4 years ago. Critical in North Carolina is the black vote. No surprise here, you're seeing an overwhelming Democratic win, 89-7 for Clinton.
Which again is fine if black people like Democratic policies, but they're not racist for being Democrats, just like most white people, if they support Republican policies, are not racist because they support Republicans.
Last time Republicans won the popular vote in a presidential election, George W. Bush, 2004, 43% of the Hispanic vote. Not going to have that number tonight.
And this is one of the things that's always been a possibility, not just in Florida, but to Chris's point, in places like Virginia, maybe even Michigan, is that you have a larger white vote for Trump than you would have thought. Trump is still winning white voters with a college degree. He's just not winning them by as much as Mitt Romney did, because white women with a college college degree are basically splitting. But what I'm hearing is that some of that exurban vote actually went to Trump. I mean, there was a huge surge of Hispanic voters in Florida. There was a late surge of African-American voters. They caught up to a big lag that they'd had in terms of souls to the polls really delivering, but they might not have delivered enough. Florida is actually genuinely what you're seeing right there. And if Democrats end up losing the state, it's going to be because of those exurban voters, white voters, some of whom are white voters with a college degree who went for the Republicans.
You know, and Joy, I'm so glad that you put it that way. I mean, there's a reason why things in politics that have never happened have never happened.
Right.
And a Democrat for running for president has never, ever won college-educated white voters. Never. Not in the modern history of polling.
Ever.
And so I think people thought that Clinton definitely had a shot at it.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean that it's therefore going to happen. There's obviously structural reasons why this isn't going to happen in terms of the way we are divided as partisans.
Yeah.
So there you have it. Rachel Maddow coming right out in the middle of the broadcast saying we're divided as partisans. Fair and balanced.
But when you separate it out by race, it's women of color who vote for Democrats. It's women of color who create the gender gap. Take women of color out, the gender gap for women has been in Republicans' favor in the Bush election. It's been in Republicans' favor for Mitt Romney by something like 14 points. The gender gap for women among white women is for Republicans. Yeah. So Hillary Clinton tying among white women with a college degree is in and of itself something that's never happened.
You are seeing, I think, a backlash in red America, rural America, to what they perceive as the cultural condescension heaped at them, rebellion against the political correctness imposed on them, a backlash to the elites of this country. And so when we look at the numbers that are lagging against President Obama's returns,
white voters in sort of rural areas, exurbs, they are coming out in big numbers. You're taking, and you've been talking about this, they're taking counties we knew were red.
We have a projection. Donald Trump is being awarded North Carolina.
Whoa. Well, that's a pitch.
Just came in fifth.
In case you didn't hear that, someone in the background said, well, that's a bitch. Yeah, these are real professionals over at MSNBC.
Trump is being awarded North Carolina.
Whoa. Well, that's a pitch.
Just came in 15 electoral votes. This makes all kinds of different paths even more interesting. There's the electoral race, 209, 187. Here it is in color. For Donald Trump this evening, 228, 209.
Again, the number that you're going for here is 270. That's the number of electoral votes that you need in order to...
If he wins New Hampshire, you get 4 out of New Hampshire, he'd be sitting there at 260. And then again, you take a look at what's left on this map, and you would need... Excuse me, you would need Wisconsin. Wisconsin would put him over. Wisconsin would put him at 270 at that point.
Jeez.
All right.
The math is getting easier to do. I will say that. Add up as many numbers in your head. I will say that. As many numbers in your head.
Let's go to Andrea Mitchell over at Clinton headquarters at the Javits Center. Andrea, I imagine that is the biggest shift in mood that you've ever seen in a large ballroom.
You can say that again. It is just palpable. When those states started turning and they began to see these numbers, people just standing shell-shocked. And there's no live entertainment here. They've got the network projections up. They've been piping in speeches like Andrew Cuomo's from outside. Chuck Schumer also, when he declared victory in his own Senate race. So there's no one here to rally this crowd. There's been radio silence except for a few communications that were received without any quotations possible on what they still believe their path to victory would be, to my colleague Kristen Welker and me and our other colleagues here. But other than that, we have heard nothing from the Clinton family. Earlier in the night, they were so optimistic they were giving us color details about what little Charlotte, the older grandchild, was wearing. And at that point, they were talking about a victory speech, very frankly. So this is putting an enormous damper, obviously, on this, and it's a very narrow path now. She has to, draw a royal straight on those remaining states.
One thing I noticed going through this coverage is that during the MSNBC coverage, they will only show the good reactions of the Hillary Clinton crowd at the Javits Center, and will never show any of the Donald Trump reactions or excitement until the very last moments. And then only then it's over their overlay of just pessimism and negativity that he had won.
If there's going to be any change in the immigration law, it's going to have to go through these guys.
I can't imagine. I mean, Donald Trump.
They're not going to build a wall.
Donald Trump campaigned on building a wall. Donald Trump campaigned on deporting more than 10 million people. He campaigned on Mexican immigrants being rapists. This is not a guy who's going to.
It's not a charity.
He's not going to sign. He has to sign the legislation.
He will deal where he has to deal to win.
There in the middle of the United States is the lectern where we were supposed to hear, where we will eventually, one would assume, hear from Hillary Clinton. The crowd came in very jazzed up, high energy. We saw the overflow room. And then as the first projections came in, the mood started to sour and then darken. And there have been sporadic pictures of people in the crowd in tears, embracing each other, that sort of thing.
Still no mention whatsoever of the Republican excitement that another candidate besides a Democrat may win. Just pure pessimism that Hillary is losing. Showing a lot of bias here. I mean, this is a news organization.
So 6 states outstanding altogether, with Nevada now off the map and in the Democratic side. What was that for, Chris?
No, I'm just amazed at the ethnic breakout of the country, the way it's going.
Yeah.
It's what's going on is not a pretty picture.
No, it's not pretty at all.
Yeah, I'm just watching it when you get a tremendous black vote out of the city of Philly, and then you have this counterpunch.
Yes, you do. I mean, you had a very robust turnout among Latinos, among African Americans, who came out, who delivered the votes, but there was a much bigger turnout from those rural areas, from those small towns, from not just the Rust Belt, actually. I mean, it's beyond the Rust Belt.
So again, the Democrats are hammering home that if you have big Hispanic and black turnout, that's robust. But if you have big white turnout, that's racist.
You know, this big vote for Trump, this is not a rainbow coalition out there voting for Trump. I mean, it's not. It's just not. And you look at where these votes are coming from, and you look at who lives in these areas. These are overwhelmingly white areas of the country. And he did not expand his appeal to encompass people of color.
Well, and he didn't, because most of the polls that are coming out now are showing that he won 2% more of the black vote than Romney did in 2012. So it seems to me like he did appeal more to black people and Hispanics, by the way, than 2012. So this argument is really just a racial argument that you're making.
Brian, the mood is somber here inside the Javits Center. A number of supporters have left in tears. I've been walking around. People have stunned expressions on their faces. One person described it as grief setting in. Now, of course, this race is not over yet, but these supporters are just shocked by what they are seeing. One of Secretary Clinton's supporters and volunteers, Annabelle Avora, joining me right now. She is Cuban. She was born in Puerto Rico. She lived in New York, recently moved, but you just came back so that you could vote and volunteer for Secretary Clinton. Your reaction right now as you await these returns?
I came here today to cast my vote and to celebrate and to make history and to break the ceiling. All I want to do right now is just go underground. That's all I want to do. I'm sad, I'm disappointed, and I know it's not over yet, but it really feels like it's almost over.
There were so many issues that you were voting for, and that's why you voted for Secretary Clinton. What are your concerns if Donald Trump does, in fact, win tonight? What's your top concern?
One of the biggest concerns is that I'm a 2-time breast cancer survivor, and I know what it's like not to have access to a doctor or to suffer from pain. And considering what's going to go on with the deductibles and the rise in the deductibles, I'm afraid that people are actually going to be without access to health care, and that the numbers are going to rise, and it's going to get worse in this country.
All right, Annabella Vora, thank you so much for sharing your perspective with us. This crowd continues to watch these returns, but again, Brian, it is quiet here tonight, shocked, stunned disbelief as they watch these returns come in. This was not the celebration they were anticipating. They thought they were here to make history, and it is not turning out that way, Brian.
There's a sense that cities have overtaken rural areas, and that cultural divide and that sense of inequality that we're feeling is the same that we had at the turn of the 20th century. So that feeling, it's almost against modernity, it's against change. And obviously, Mr. Trump has captured that. Again, whether he wins or not, he's come really close.
Do you think it's fair to put Trumpism as his iteration of republicanism along the same number line as the sort of British far-right nationalist xenophobic parties like UKIP that was so in favor of Brexit, like the British Union of Fascists, like Marine Le Pen?
100%. I mean, Lafarge was at the convention. Lafarge has been here campaigning for.
He went to a battleground state. He dropped him into
Trump.
a rally.
Yeah.
Look,
in Mississippi, he dropped him.
All of our lives, I talked about this the other night. Politics has been divided by a vertical line down the 50-yard line. We debate between the 45-yard lines, right-left. Right? We have overheated debates about, the difference between justice and injustice is a 39.6% tax bracket or a 35% tax bracket. But politics now, the line is a lateral line. The people above the line are people who've benefited from the technological revolution, have benefited from globalization, and then there's people below the line who've been left behind. Right. The seismic event of this last generation, really fundamentally what this race was about to some degree, is the hangover from the financial crisis. 13 million people lost their homes. 12 million people lost their jobs. The bankers got $1 trillion in bailouts, and no one went to jail. The ideological line is permeable. Right? You can move back and forth between the Donald Trump camp and the Bernie Sanders camp. And what's increasingly going to define politics is that over-under line. And you're seeing that really play out in this election cycle with long-term implications.
But right now, I'm getting emails from folks. Everybody's really worried about the community, the Muslim American community, the Latino community. And if Trump becomes the president, he's going to have to figure out how to.
People who have felt threatened by this candidacy are feeling. What are they feeling tonight?
Los Angeles County has had an increase of 24% in hate crimes since the candidacy was announced. And this is a bastion of liberalism in California. In my hometown, where I went to high school, last week, an elementary school that was Spanish dominant got spray painted with "Build the Wall Higher." Moms that had basically to tell their elementary school their kids of 5 years old of what happened to their school. So if Trump wins, he's going to have a conversation that turns down the temperature, that makes people feel inclusive, and he has to act presidential.
Mitt Romney did with the Latino vote. But make no mistake about it, when you see the states on this path to 270 that Donald Trump is carving tonight, what's doing this for Donald Trump? It's the white vote. 4 years ago, people were saying after the election, no Republican could go higher than Mitt Romney did. Donald Trump's proven you can.
On this Hispanic number 2, it's fascinating because you're right. Donald Trump, if that number holds, he's doing better than Mitt Romney did with Latino voters. He's still doing worse than John McCain did with Latino voters. And the way he's making up for that, the way that isn't a fatal number, is by spiking the white vote. This is something that I talked about at the very beginning of the night, Chris, and you said you disagreed with me on it. But I do feel like a lot of the really ragged racial edge of what Donald Trump has proposed was designed to change the behavior of white people, to tap into a type of white vote, an enthusiasm among white voters that was going to obliterate anything you might otherwise need to get from people of color. I mean, we do have Clinton underperforming Barack Obama with Latinos. We have Clinton underperforming Barack Obama with African Americans, although that was expected. What we've got, though, the biggest number and the biggest thing that explains how Trump could maybe win the presidency with only 29% of the Latino vote is that he's spiked white vote. He has figured out a way to do that. And that has always been the far right's dream, that you could figure out a way to do it without minorities. In fact, you could figure out a way to do it on the backs of minorities by threatening minorities in a way that make a lot of people uncomfortable, but that does awaken something basically that's racial anxiety among whites. And that's how you win. That's been a dream on the far right. It's the Ann Coulter dream of white turnout.
So in MSNBC's eyes, anybody who is appealing to white people is always going to be a racist demagogue in the vein of the far right. But if you appeal to black voters and Hispanic voters, you're an inclusive FDR type that could only be deserving of praise.
I have to interrupt here just to say Kristen Welker standing by at Clinton headquarters to talk to us. Kristen, am I correct that we're going to hear from John Podesta, assumed from the podium?
Well, here's what we know, Brian. He is headed over here. What's significant about that is that the Clinton campaign has largely gone dark for well over an hour now. Let me just take you through what happened. He was at the Peninsula Hotel here in New York watching returns with Secretary Clinton. He started to leave the hotel, encountered reporters who asked him for a reaction to the results so far. He didn't have any. And then they said, are you going over to the Javits Center? Yes, he is coming here. But he did not say whether or not he was going to actually speak. We anticipate we will hear from him. That would make sense. He is not, or he did not indicate that Secretary Clinton would be coming over with him. In fact, when he was asked directly, is Secretary Clinton coming to the Javits Center? He said, no, I am going. So this is significant again because there is movement from within the Clinton campaign headquarters, and we are going to, in some way, shape, or form, likely get some reaction from the chairman. Let me just set the scene here, Brian. Inside the Javits Center, a number of people have left in tears. There is stunned disbelief as these results, as they come in. Earlier in the evening, they were looking for any sign that there was a potential path forward. When the results of Nevada, for example, came in, the crowd burst into cheers. But now, really, it's just silence as they listen to the music playing and await to hear what happens next. Brian.
Kristen Welker at Clinton headquarters.
The final results.
Yeah.
It's very, very, very close in a lot of these states, including all of the ones that are still outstanding.
A chunk of the electorate right there. Look at that.
You know, in human terms, candidates, all of them that are any good, including the Clintons, race to the last second with the last extra ounce of their energy. They're dead. They're exhausted beyond belief. It takes a month for some of these people to recover.
Yeah.
And so at the very moment the results come in, you know what it's like to be really tired. Your emotions are shot.
I've heard about it.
And you have to come out, and you have to come out and say, right, I lost, or even I won. I mean, we went through this with President Carter. I thought the reason nobody liked it, but he withdrew. You can see it early because I thought, and I don't know him that well. I like him, but I respect him. But I think he did it because he didn't think he could hold it together later that night. I think he was so beat. And you're supposed to do it. You know, you have to do it. But I guess we're going to have a concession tomorrow. But maybe not. Maybe this is going to go
maybe
on.
Not. You know what I mean? I think if you're going to do it, you want to be sure that you can. Yep. That you're sort of up. But you do owe it to your supporters, your donors, to everybody else to exhaust every possibility before you do that. I don't think it's unusual.
I just don't think anyone thought it would be her. Based on all the polls that showed her with the 3.5, ahead 3 to 5 points, that it would be her exhausting all of her.
No, they didn't. And people were very optimistic. I mean, you looked at the early vote. You looked at what was coming in. I was getting texts all day. In Broward, it was this. And in Johnson County, Iowa, wow, it was the biggest, turnout they've ever had. In Philadelphia, it turned out it didn't count on the other side. I don't know what the total vote is going to be, but it looks like it's going to be it was 127 million in 2012, and it feels like this is going to be north of 140 million maybe.
Maybe without knowing it, Rachel Maddow is about to give one of the best arguments against early voting that I've ever heard a Democrat say.
One of the things that I think will be interesting, particularly within Democratic politics, is see what this does to the strategizing around early vote. Because the Democrats love early voting, right? Democrats
They
have
were banking it.
They banked the vote, and that's a big part of how Barack Obama put together his 2 wins, was working that early vote to try to make sure that they could lock in people when they'd made their decision and get it done and get them off the table so you can focus your research on the people who haven't made it to the polls yet. In this case, you had a struck by lightning circumstance. If you believe in the Comey effect, you got a struck by lightning circumstance under which millions and millions and millions and millions of people, almost a third of the electorate, voted in the 9-day period between Jim Comey said, hey, Hillary Clinton might have, the equivalent of hemorrhagic fever, and 9 days later when he said, oh, actually, she doesn't. And in that time, if people had been thinking about the election but not voting, would the difference have been enough to push this a point and a half and make a difference?
Going crazy. He has got the responsibility, probably if he wins, to deal with that. So that's a reality he has to deal with. And I think he may come out tonight just say, I'm not as crazy as I look.
I don't know how he feels about that responsibility. He may look at that number, the Dow with those Dow futures down 800, and think, good.
How come?
How could he say that?
They'll say markets go up, markets go down, and once people see what a tremendous guy I am, all kinds of things that
His closing argument had a picture has a picture of Janet Yellen. And Lloyd Blankfein, and George Soros talking about the global elites who are working against you, as if there is a conspiracy of global elites, which is the Clintons and some powerful Jewish people, that is out to take your country away, and I'm going to give it back. I don't think a guy like that worries about the markets being down on account of him. I think he takes it as a badge of honor.
So a multi-billion-dollar businessman takes as a badge of honor the fact that the markets are extremely down. Yeah, that's not showing any bias whatsoever, MSNBC. None at all. I think the markets closed up that day, right?
I think it's very close to the Titanic, this kind of situation where even God himself cannot sink this ship. I mean, everybody agreed, and that he was going to lose because he made all those mistakes. He had no ad campaign on television. He had no ground game. He said things that were derisive to a quarter of the population. He did it over and over again. People weren't going to vote for him, and they did. And I think it's this one word we kidded about the other night. Attitude. There's an attitude against the establishment now that's so strong, they're willing to take a chance on this guy because they do not want to register, I agree with the direction of this country. They didn't want to say that.
We should have closed cap.
That has not yet been called. This is the district Obama carried in 2008. Romney won it in 12. Last count I saw, I had Trump leading in this district. So that would be the extra electoral vote for Donald Trump at that point. Hillary Clinton to stop Donald Trump from becoming president. It really is. It's ironic. We talked for weeks, months maybe. Donald Trump, he needs an inside straight. He needs a royal flush. All of these poker terms for that sort of 1 in a million hand. That's the position Hillary Clinton's in right now. Sweep them. Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin. And I showed you the gaps in them.
Yeah, or Pennsylvania, Michigan, Minnesota, New Hampshire, and Omaha. Is her other path right now? I mean, her path, like I say right now, they're deer tracks. Deer tracks.
And a draft choice, promising running back.
Yeah, and you can't have those faithless electors from Washington State either, by the way.
We just got this collection of...
I just think it's funny that Rachel Maddow is now banking that she has to get all the electors for Clinton to win it all. But just a week or two later, she'd be, rallying that they all abandon Trump and come to Clinton or find a third party or whatever it is that the Democrats were trying to do to undermine the election.
At some point, they've got to commit, and this is how they are committing.
Front page of the Inquirer.
Meanwhile, we're just looking at the lower right-hand part of your screen there. Dow Jones futures down over 500. We've seen that number go from 200 to 300 to 500 to 700, approaching 800 at one point tonight. This is looking ahead again at what's going to happen when the markets open. The markets have been, frankly, for lack of a better term, freaking out every time it looks like Donald Trump might have a shot at the presidency. It'll be a global market shock tomorrow if things are just the way they are now and they don't change at all, let alone if he does get even closer to this or goes over the top tonight.
What is going on at the Clinton headquarters right now, backstage, which is kind of a celebrity reflection, if you will, of what's going on among Hillary Clinton supporters. I'm told Lady Gaga is in tears. Cher is in tears. Katy Perry was supposed to sing the national anthem in this kind of surprise start. She didn't. She had a stand-in instead. I think, they had planned, and you really can understand the degree to which they deeply believed that they were going to win this election.
Look at the infrastructure around tonight. Look at that event, the staging, the venue, the talent backstage, all of it.
The napkins from
the napkins.
That's your Hillary napkin from the.
It was a souvenir I saved because I thought, hey, this might be the president.
You know what? I've still got my John Kerry tchotchkes from 2004. It got to be said.
I have a lot from Governor Romney's campaign too, and deal with it.
And I'm thinking about President Obama too. I mean, to have the first African American president succeeded by a guy who was endorsed by the KKK is. A guy who had his campaign manager, as his campaign CEO, somebody who says, I run the website for the alt-right, which defines itself as in white nationalist terms.
Yeah.
For them to get that edgy on white racial animus. And have that be the succession to the first black president.
A lot of people a lot of African American people, Latino people, Muslim people, whatever. Well, feel like, the country just told me exactly what they thought of me.
Yep.
And I mean, there's going to be, or people like myself who have who believe in a pluralistic nation that, it's a sort of, there are actually people who really believe that the strength lies in our pluralism.
Right, that it makes us better.
It makes it a better country. It is a devastating. I mean, my daughter came down from college, and a lot of daddies are having a lot of hard conversations with a lot of daughters tonight. I'll promise you that. It was unbelievably difficult.
Well, look at the number of daughters in that room at the Javits Center tonight, clearly there to witness that event.
We're hearing the room pipe up here at the Midtown Hilton. We have been advised that Trump himself will take the stage. We don't know that for sure, but the room is reacting to something. We also don't know what Donald Trump will say, if this will be a victory speech or what.
Could it maybe just be that the room's reacting to the fact that Trump, against all odds, seems to have won the election, and you, MSNBC, can only be confused as to why they're celebrating because you're so in your own bubble that Hillary was going to win inevitably?
There is a report out there that a call has been placed from Clinton to Trump. We do not have independent confirmation of that. But the big screen in this ballroom has clearly broadcast something that has gone over big league with the Trump supporters.
And as we get to this point of the night, I think it's also, James, as you were saying, it's hard to overstate the political import of what this is. It's also hard to overstate the difference in this kind of candidate in what Donald Trump has proposed doing. I mean, there has never been anyone in national public life who has proposed banning members of a particular religion from this country. That's never happened in mainstream public life, let alone from an American president. This is as what Donald Trump is offering in terms of policy is as radical a departure from normal American politics as anything that has ever happened in any of our lifetimes. I mean, he has promised political vengeance for his enemies. He has promised to jail his opponent in this election. He has promised to restrict the press in unprecedented ways. He has proposed banning Muslims from the United States. Even if you don't believe it, he has. He's not rescinded that pledge. He has pledged to rip us out of NATO. He has said he will go meet with Vladimir Putin. He doesn't care if President Obama is still in office. He will do it before he's sworn in. He has promised to create a national deportation force to go door to door, business to business, and throw more than 10 million people out of this country. I mean, if he does any one of those things that he has promised to do, our country is about to face some serious crises. And so, I mean, buckle up. Your country needs you at a time like this. If he does any of the things he said he's going to do that are so outside political norms, the country is about to go through something that is going to be a radical shock. That's going to be a bigger shock than just electing him.
Just taking in these scenes in the ballroom here, the New York Hilton Hotel. Chris Matthews.
Well, thanks for that. I'm trying to deal with what Rachel's trying to deal with is the future now, and what looks to be the future. And I guess what gives me some sense of calm is that these guys are still restricted by our Constitution, and that the Constitution is pretty damn good. And it does limit the ability of anybody to come in and change much. There's a leavening effect, a leveling effect to anyone elected. They have to contend with the Congress and the courts, and it's not easy to make big news. Anyway, we've got something coming here.
Yeah, I got to bust in with what you can read on our screen, the graphic in red. Kristen Welker covering the Clinton campaign. Kristen?
Have now confirmed that Secretary Clinton has conceded to Donald Trump. This concession took place in a phone call we anticipate just moments ago. And as we are awaiting Donald Trump taking the stage here, that is the news at this hour. Secretary Clinton has conceded to Donald Trump.
The Trump world that we're seeing here, represented here, a lot of the key figures there. David Bossie in the red tie and the blazer with the brass buttons there on the left side of your screen. A famous anti-Clinton warrior of the 90s. He was one of these guys who was down in Arkansas prowling through the Clintons' past to try to find scandals about them. He was brought on board as the Donald Trump deputy campaign manager after Kellyanne Conway was brought on board. She was brought on board at the same time as Steve Bannon. Steve Bannon, the publisher of a very, very, very conservative website called Breitbart, which was seen as being a sort of fringe conservative publication, but he brought a lot of the ethos of that fringe into the Trump campaign. That's what gave it a lot of its edge.
Certainly didn't suggest anything scary. I think he's aware as a business guy that he has to deal with the current situation, which is people are scared to death of his presidency right now. That'll be his first order of business long before he ever takes office. And he's got to do it now. Like Bill Clinton, when he was elected in 92. We all down and watched his economic session with the Republican business types, and they all became somewhat enamored of Bill Clinton. They were not afraid of him anymore because he sat down with them and talked about economic policy, somewhat centrist policy. And obviously Trump has a lot more ground to cover there in terms of reaching something more conventional in terms of his. But infrastructure, he talked about that. He talked about having partnerships with other countries. He didn't talk about being unfair to them or screwing them in terms of trade deals. He did say all the right things, I expect. That's going to be picked up in the press this weekend, or rather tonight. But
white women, I think older white women over 45, really did alarm would be an understatement to describe his state of mind.
Hoping
and
to get him on the air
to the ground.
Yeah.
So, this is going to be a higher wire act, and people are scared. People are scared because of the set of policies we've been talking about all night, his immigration policies and things he said he's going to do. But as much concern, I think, should lay at the feet of the fact that people picked him and that this is where the country was, and we so dramatically and terribly misread where we thought these things would disqualify him. We thought you couldn't say these things about Muslims. I thought you couldn't say these things about dividing us along racial lines.
John McCain.
This is going to take a lot of sinking in. It really is. I mean, as I kind of process this day and this evening, it's really hard to get beyond, oh my God, that this not only improbable thing happened, but I mean, just to be frank, it feels potentially cataclysmic, but obviously we have to hope that it isn't. We have to hope that that somehow this works out. We will have a lot of time to figure out how this happened and why we didn't see it, and the voters who came out who weren't detected by the polls and whatever. But I think right now we have to look toward this new administration and what is it going to be like, as Steve said.
This point where we had seen in American market futures, we'd seen these huge plunges, even to the point where a couple of different indexes were actually halted because they appeared to be in crash. They went into crash protection mode before they reopened. But now with these opening of the markets in some of our closest allies, you're seeing the world engage in a collective financial freakout about this news from the United States.
That the markets are.
I think that's significant because internationally, now the United States seems to have entered that camp of right-wing leaders, countries that are led by megalomaniacs, by narcissists, part of a trend that led to, frankly, to Brexit, that what we're seeing in the Philippines, what we're seeing in Turkey, what we're seeing a rise of strongmen again in the Middle East. And that is deeply concerning. When you see world markets reacting negatively, tanking on the news of a new election, I think it shows a complete lack of confidence. And I think it's because they have experience, probably more than this country is, of what happens when you elect people who put themselves first and feel that they're at the center of the universe. This has happened many times in history, and it never goes well. Of course, he said all the right things tonight, and strongman leaders always do. What happens, they wondered out loud to me, if they're ordered to go and round up millions of people and put them on trains and deport them from this country?
If he wants to make an enemy of Paul Ryan, he's going to discover that the Speaker of the House on a daily basis is more powerful than the President on all things except the targeting of missiles.
Trump appealed to them by saying, not just, I'm going to make America great again, but that the problem really is those immigrants, and the problem is those Muslims, and the problem is those people in the inner cities.
Well, as you can see, immediately after the victory speech, MSNBC started going into its extreme anti-white, anti-Trump dialogue, in which they spinned immigration numbers and various interpretations of what Trump had said in the past. Now, like I've said before, Trump did bring a lot of this conversation onto himself. So I will give the left a little bit of leeway here as they make their arguments. But to assume everything from the start is going to be the worst, I think, is a negative connotation for a news source, a news company, to bring to the argument, to bring to their broadcast. Hope you enjoyed this video. I hope it revealed a lot of the bias that MSNBC attempted to go into the coverage with. Not to say that other networks don't have their bias. You can see all the different networks on my YouTube. If you like this video, comment down below. Tell me what you thought of the bias that you saw. And follow me on Twitter at Aaron_RVA.